World War One, a war that left over 16 million dead and 20 million injured. A war to end all wars was a frequent saying. Over 200 men who walked the same halls as we do today, made an unbelievably brave decision. 37 did not come back, but all made the ultimate sacrifice. IGS was at the end of its golden era for headmasters. With the departure of Donald Cameron, the school took on Headmaster Charles Flint. Harry James Halley, along with many other students in his class, stayed the whole 6-year tenure of Charles Flint before graduating and 9 years later enlisting. In the Army, Harry was welcomed with open arms into the 5th Divisional Signal Corps. With the war finishing 2 years after he arrived, Harry departed the fields of France in 1919. He went on to marry, have a family, and eventually leave Ipswich. In many ways, he exemplified his title as an IGS Old Boy due to his bravery, initiative, and courage on the fields of France during World War I. Whilst with the Australian Imperial Force, he displayed the IGS core values of community, excellence, leadership, and integrity. IGS, being the oldest secondary school in Queensland, was still in the early stages during the 1900s. Harry was one of the earliest enrolments as he started there only 38 years after the school's establishment. In 1907, IGS lost one of its greatest headmasters to ever be in charge of the school. In Donald Cameron's retirement, the school needed a new man to fulfill the role of headmaster. Charles Flint was candidate number 1 and was given the reins. Flint, a graduate of the University of Sydney, was a headmaster who was looked up to by all the students and was in most cases very popular with the IGS men. His school spirit was second to none, starting the official IGS Old Boys Association and designing the official school crest. Charles's benchmarks were set at very high standards for both sporting and academia. This showed with many public recognitions throughout his 6-year stretch at IGS. Along with 25 other people, Harry made up the 1903 cohort for IGS. Whilst there was no well-established men enrolled at the same time as him, it is assumed that many did leave or graduate at that time. He did not identify himself as a keen sportsman or academic. This by any means does not mean that his enthusiasm for these aspects of school life were any lesser. He was a day boy living across or near to Ipswich Girls' Grammar. He passed his junior examinations in 1906, but not with flying colours by any means. In July 20, 1906 edition of the Brisbane Courier, it lists him under the students who passed their exams, and is not under any award or medal lists. It states, "The list of candidates who passed the junior public examinations was issued tonight. The number of candidates was 1,219, and of these 845 was 69.5% passed, and 133 qualified themselves in the matriculation exams under the revised regulations. In 1905, there was 1,265 candidates, of whom 879, or 69.5%, were successful, and 127 qualified for matriculation under the old regulations. Harry James Halley exemplified his title as an IGS Old Boy due to his bravery, initiative, and courage on the fields of France during World War I. Without his IGS education, his values of excellence, community, integrity, and leadership would have not been the same standard as they were. School is an important part of any boy's life, regardless of whether or not a student was recognized for sporting or academic achievements. As Halley did not win any prizes or wasn't in any first teams, this is no reason to assume that his life as an IGS student was any more fruitful. His grammar school education set him up to do many things in the future. His future took place in many areas, but possibly the most important thing that he ever did was fight for his country when his number was called. World War I saw over 420,000 voluntary enlistments from Australia alone. With Halley being one of these men to enlist, he put his life on the line to defend his country when called. He enlisted on the 10th of October 1916, and after training and other prerequisites to enable to go more fulfilled, Harry embarked on the 11th of May 1917 via the HMAT Shropshire. Initially fighting for the Field Artillery Brigade, Halley was eventually moved to the 5th Divisional Signal Corps. The battles he engaged in were the Battle of Amiens, the Battle of Pozières, the Battle of Brudseine Ridge, the Hindenburg Line, and the German Spring Offensive. On the Western Front, Halley fought through possibly the worst two battles in the whole war. The Battle of Amiens and Pozières were two battles in which the greatest weapon the Germans had was the weather. With over 38,000 men killed in Amiens alone, it would be hard to imagine how many were killed from the conditions. The battle began on a foggy morning at 4:20 a.m. on the 8th of August 1918. The 5th Division, the one to which Halley was affiliated, began near Villers-Bretonneux, along with the 2nd Division. Along from there, the 8th and 5th Brigade grouped with the 15th and 17th, also grouping and going a separate route. The three objectives were set for each group. Only one successfully met all three objectives. The tension, and in many ways fear from the soldiers on both sides, was expected, but under-anticipated. A soldier by the name of J.R. Armitage kept a journal of this frightening battle, and his words show the emotion of each soldier. This document was written on the 7th of August, the night before the battle. His words stressed the sound of silence and tension, silence that would eventually be broken in the cruelest of fashions. It was utterly still. Vehicles made no sound on the marshy ground. The silence played on our nerves a bit. As we got our guns into position, you could hear the drivers whispering to their horses and men muttering curses under their breath. And still the silence persisted, broken only by the whine of a stray rifle bullet or a long-range shell passing high overhead. We could feel that hundreds of groups of men were doing the same thing, preparing for the heaviest barrage ever launched. As soldiers, these men were the least likely to back down. Their bravery in the Somme shows just how Australian spirit decided in many ways the war. After the Battle of Amiens, it is thought that the British and their allied forces struck so much fear into the ire of their opponents, Germany never regained their momentum. If it wasn't for these men's efforts in the swamps of the Somme, it is possible that the Allies would have not won the war. A large statement, but one validated by the acts of these men on the battlefield. Harry James Halley exemplified his title as an IGS old boy due to his bravery, initiative, and courage on the fields of France during World War I. Whilst with the Field Artillery Brigade, February 1917 reinforcements, and the 5th Divisional Signal Corps, he displayed the IGS core values of community, excellence, leadership, and integrity. Due to his participation and bravery, like so many others in the battlefields, the Allied forces were able to win the war in a swifter fashion. As Harry survived the war, his stressful days in the trenches were over. He returned to his office job as a clerk. Although his post-war stories isn't the greatest of feats, his work in World War I, creating bombs, fences, and other makeshift items, secured the Allies the war.
Am I ready?
Only you can answer that, sir.
They're going to chuck everything they've got at us.
And we shall have to chuck it back, won't we, sir?
Quite right.
Now, there's no point in pretending that this is going to be easy.
How are you, Thompson? You shaking that coal?
I'm all right, sir. Thank you.
Good man.
We're nearly there, chaps. Just hold fast. Won't be long now.
We're with you, sir.
I know you are, Wakefield. I can't tell you how much lighter that makes the task.
Right, son.
Back bayonets!
Daisy, whatever's the matter with you?
Someone walked over my grave.
I'm so sorry.
What happened?
I don't know. I suddenly felt terribly cold.
I won't be sorry when this one's over!
Harry returned to Ipswich on the 5th of July 1919. His role as a clerk did not change. His status as a person, however, changed very much. Harry married Gertrude Victoria Elliot on the 15th of June 1920. Surprisingly, this was not done in Ipswich, but in the town of Mosman in New South Wales. His records state, in 1920, after his embarkation of the HMAT Shropshire was finished, he moved to Sydney. Although it is not known where his spouse was born, due to the time period and the fact that their child was also born in the same location, it is assumed Gertrude Halley was born in Ipswich. They moved in 1921 to Sydney, where he continued his roles as a clerk. It is assumed that his wife was a stay-at-home mother due to the time period's social roles. Keith Halley, son of Harry and Gertrude, was born on the 14th of May 1921. His role was not listed, however it is known that he married at the age of 23, having two daughters, Sandra Gale Halley and one other. Her details have not been given due to security reasons, with her presumably still being alive. With Harry laying down foundations in New South Wales, Keith also lived the rest of his life there. Presumably, his children also lived in New South Wales. No written record of any births were written after Sandra Gale Halley, which is not a usual predicament for a woman born in 1950s. Although the war was finished, Harry never lowered his standards. He always lived up to his title as an IGS Old Boy. His bravery, initiative, and courage on the fields of France during World War I carried back to his daily life in Australia. He never failed to display the IGS core values of community, excellence, leadership, and integrity. Throughout the past 6 weeks, I have been more than honoured to write and study about a true Ipswich hero like Halley. With his services not only at school, but primarily on the battlefield and in the communities that he lived in, he left a large footprint wherever his boot landed. In saying this, wherever Harry was, he exemplified his title as an IGS Old Boy due to his bravery, initiative, and courage in all the aspects of life. He was always displayed as an IGS man who displayed core values of community, excellence, leadership, and integrity, no matter what the situation or event was.